In mid-2020, a new study came out that shows that the SEC's confidential submission process for companies seeking to go public has an unintended consequence, reducing the number of meritless lawsuits filed against companies seeking to avoid bad news in the days leading up to their IPO. Companies who are vulnerable during this pre-IPO time period who might be more likely to settle meritless lawsuits to avoid bad publicity. Today on Zippy Point.
Quick Zips by Zippy Point.
Quick and dirty. I'm Brock Romanek. I'm a big fan of use. So when a company plans to go public, it must file a registration statement with the SEC, which the staff in the SEC's Division of Corporation Finance pulls for full review before the IPO is allowed to go off. That full review process results in the staff issuing a written comment letter with comments from both a legal and an accounting perspective. Historically, when the pre-IPO company filed its registration statement with the SEC, normally on a Form S-1, but over the years there have been a few other forms that are available for smaller companies seeking to go public. The registration statement was available on the SEC's filing database, EDGAR, and the pre-IPO content in that registration statement was publicly available. In 2012, Congress enacted the Jobs Act, which permitted a new process whereby smaller companies, a new category called emerging growth companies, could submit a draft registration statement to the corporation finance staff for their IPOs rather than file them and have the content confidential, so it wasn't publicly available. One of the reasons that companies weren't going public was because they wanted to keep their information private, hold on to their proprietary information so that their competitors wouldn't see what they were doing. So this confidential submission process allowed companies to sort of test the waters with the SEC, file its registration statement, see if there was interest in the market in an IPO of that company, and if not, withdraw the registration statement without that content in the registration statement ever going public. Many companies were and still are deciding to remain privately held. Investments from private equity firms are more than bountiful over the last 10, 20 years. But still, the SEC wanted to encourage as many companies as possible to go public to keep up in the global race for publicly held companies. In 2017, the SEC announced it would extend this benefit of a pre-IPO confidential submission process to all companies. It wouldn't be just limited to these emerging growth companies. This announcement lists certain conditions for all companies being able to use this confidential submission process, one of which is that the confidential draft must be technically filed with the SEC and publicly available at least 15 days before an anticipated roadshow or at least 15 days ahead of the desired effective date of the registration statement. An effective date of a registration statement is the day that the SEC effectively blesses the document and the company can go public and start being traded on a stock exchange. The staff of the Division of Corporation Finance has also posted a set of FAQs that lays out in greater detail what the process is for confidential submissions. For example, the need to seek confidential treatment. In addition, the SEC's EDGAR Filer Manual explains how you submit a Form DRS. That's what these are called when they're submitted. Form DRS stands for Draft Registration Statement in Volume 2 of that Filer Manual. So now the trio of professors have come out with this interesting study that shows that the confidential submission process has an unintended benefit, that fewer lawsuits are filed against newly public companies. Here are 5 things to note from that study based on 8 years of data pulled from this blog about the study by one of the professors on Columbia Law School's CLS Blue Sky blog. One is that 90% of companies have opted out for confidential submissions. If a company is filing to go public, it doesn't have to do a confidential submission process. It can do it old school and file a Form S-1 publicly as in the old days, but 90% of companies, since this has been available, have decided to opt to keep the information private. Even though confidential filing means that pre-IPO companies pay quite a steep price for an erosion in market transparency, they have severe IPO underpricing that has been borne out in a few studies, including this one that recently just won an award from the AICPA. 2, lawsuits are frequently in the works before an IPO. The study talks about Facebook, Zynga, and Groupon. Through these pre-IPO disclosures that are made in registration statements, though, plaintiffs gain additional fodder for their pre-suit investigations, and it makes discovery easier for them. The control group in that study, companies that did not use a confidential submission process, either because this was before the data runs between 2008 and 2014, So some period of that time is before the Jobs Act was enacted. The professors looked at non-shareholder lawsuits filed against these companies that went public during this 6-year time period and found that these companies were hit with 25% more lawsuits during the period between the companies filed a registration statement with the SEC and the actual effectiveness of the registration statement compared to a pre-IPO registration benchmark period. 3, the professors then compared that control group, the companies that publicly filed before an IPO, against those companies that opted to file on a confidential basis. As shown in this chart, companies that filed on a confidential basis were likely to avoid lawsuits that the control firms faced around their IPOs altogether, and rather than simply having them delayed. That's what the study found. 4, the professors also found that confidential filings are effective for deterring business-initiated lawsuits, but not lawsuits initiated by individuals or not-for-profit groups. This is more likely, according to the study, because businesses rely more on the information in the registration statements than do other parties. 5, so the big news is that there's a higher incidence of lawsuits in the control sample that is driven by meritless lawsuits than when so this bores out what I said at the beginning, that these are a period of time when companies are more vulnerable and they have a heightened incentive to quickly resolve legal issues and just get those over with so they can just go on with their IPO. And this is an excerpt from the blog about the study highlighting that point. So let me know what you think.